The story goes that Susanna Heschel, a renowned scholar of comparative religions and Jewish studies at Dartmouth, and the daughter of the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, was making a visit to a congregation where she was advocating for the ordination of women within the conservative movement. And then, again as the story goes, an angry gentleman in the back of the kahal stands up and says to Dr. Heschel, quote, "A woman belongs on the bima as much as an orange belongs on the Seder plate." And because of this famous encounter, as the story continues, Jews all around the world have championed for the ordination of women and have added a feminist twist to the Passover Seder by, yes, placing an orange right in the middle of the Seder plate. So just by a show of hands, who's heard this story before? Great. Does anyone have the tradition of having an orange on your Seder plate? Wonderful. So it's a good story. It's a fantastic story. The problem with the story is that it never actually happened. At least it didn't happen in the way that I'm telling it. And I want to use this time this morning to tell the real story, because I think the truth matters here. And it matters in a way because the transformation of the story over time has actually done it and the ritual of having an orange on your Seder plate a bit of a disservice in its ikar, in its essence. So here's the real story. There are a couple of things that do remain true, that remain constant in the story that we're used to hearing, and the true story and the original story. Susanna Heschel, the scholar and the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, is still our protagonist. And she is addressing a group of people, but her audience is actually students at the Hillel at Oberlin College in Ohio. And in this meeting, some of the students introduced Dr. Heschel to an early feminist Haggadah that advocated for, in solidarity with Jewish lesbians, putting a crust of bread in the middle of the Seder plate. A statement that was meant to convey that lesbians belong in Judaism just as much as bread belongs on the Seder plate. And when Dr. Heschel hears this, she reacts with visceral negativity, because she's heartbroken by what that message actually conveys. Because what that message conveys is, despite the good intentions, the message is one of this radical ritual is that gays and lesbians are counter to Judaism. Just like Hametz is counter to keeping Pesach, to keeping Passover. So Dr. Heschel takes a different approach, stating that LGBTQ Jews should never be included and welcomed at the expense of halakha, at the expense of tradition, but rather should be integrated and held with love and with acceptance because of halakha and because of Jewish values, and therefore shouldn't be symbolized as forbidden chametz, bread, but rather with the same normalcy as any other kosher food, as any other kosher and Pesach appropriate food on the Seder plate. And so after this visit, Dr. Heschel decides to start her own Pesach tradition, and she suggests putting an orange in the middle of the Seder plate, not to advocate for the ordination of women, but to express the fruitfulness of LGBTQ Jews and their consistent contribution to Judaism and to the world. And additionally, it goes a little step further with the symbolism that the seeds that come when you eat a slice of orange, she meant for that we spit them out symbolically, just as we spit out homophobia and bigotry and racism. And so there it is. That is the true story behind the story. Some things are similar, some are different. But ultimately, what's most striking is that the original nafkamina, the original takeaway, the original point of the entire story has been distorted over time. And to be fair, many of us might not have a problem with that. I mean, after all, the message is still a good one, right? An orange on the Seder plate for the sake of women ordination is still something we should fight for. And honestly, that's kind of how folk works. Whether if it's a folk story, folk music, folk art, folk changes, and it adapts, and it takes on its own form, it loses its author, and it sets out on its own path. But hear me out, because this is one where I think we need to bring back this story to its origins. Yes, of course, there are different battles we should be fighting, and all of them are good and important and deserve our attention. But how we shape our battles crafts the lens through which we see this holiday, this religion of Judaism, and really this life as we live it. Because ultimately, what is more powerful? To ground our battles, our struggles, our standing up to injustice and intolerance in the filtered narrative of bitter defiance that gives power and authority to one grumpy man in the back of a synagogue? Or, in contrast, to celebrate the road down which we've come and to make compassion, empathy, and basic human dignity the norm of progress in Jewish life. Which is more powerful? Speaking out against one man with a hateful opinion, or choosing celebration and nourishment rather than rebel against the tradition that gave us our values of justice in the first place? One is a story giving power to Narishkeit, and one is a story that posits that we're engaged in something holy, and that what the future holds is going to be even holier. Which should remind all of us of another story. A story that we told last night, and a story that we're going to, please God, tell again tonight. A story that earns the title of the Magid, of the actual telling of the story, in our Haggadot. And once again, we are faced with the same choice to find value in the original, or to add some flair to a different type of storytelling. I can't tell you how many Seders I've been to where the Magid section is done as a dramatic acting out of the oppression of slavery on the Israelites in Egypt. Emphasis is placed on how cruel the Egyptians were, how dehumanizing and degrading it was to be slaves under Pharaoh, and how God saved us with an outstretched arm and brought us across the sea. And that's where a lot of Magid sections end. Right there. And frankly, it's where a lot of Haggadahs fill up the majority of their pages with commentary and with their own thoughts, with an idea of different plays and different skits that you can act out, or a different philosophical or theological conversation you could be having, or just conversation prompts in general. Including my biggest pet peeve of all during a Pesach Seder, no offense to anyone who does this, but it is my pet peeve, where the Haggadah asks all the participants to describe how you feel enslaved today. And meanwhile, the true halakhic part of Magid, the true Jewish legal obligation of the story of Pesach, is usually read by the leader of the Seder quickly and moved on right past. Though it does have one line in it that all of us know very well, Arami Oved Avi, my father was a wandering Aramaean. But that line, and that Magid, that story that we are obligated to tell, is not about the horrors of slavery. It's not even about the miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt. It is about a mitzvah called Bikurim. It comes directly from the Torah itself, where God commands the Israelites that when they enter the promised land and begin to harvest their crops, that they are to take the first fruits, and they are to put them in a basket, give them to the Kohanim, to the priest, and offer up these very lines, the very lines of our Magid, with words of thanks and appreciation. Which story is more powerful? The one that focuses on our oppression and asks us to remember the capability of human cruelty? Or the one that says that we could have responded with hatred, with endless war, with unwavering mistrust, but we instead chose to plant fruit trees in our promised home. And we decided to offer the world a religion of peace, of tolerance, of compassion, of gratitude? Which story is the grumpy man in the back of the shul? And which one is the celebration of fruitfulness and progress? We are, each of us individually, us as a family, us as a community, without trying to sound too cliche or trite, the stories we tell. We are the stories we tell. And sometimes our stories take on stories of their own. Sometimes they speak to our insecurities, to our anger, to our frustration, and they trigger within us rebellion and spite. But sometimes the stories we tell are simple reflections of thanks, of awe, of wonder for where we've been, how we got there, how blessed we were along the way, and how holy the path in front of us is. As we come together this Shabbat of Pesach, this Shabbat of our first day of Passover, heading into a second night of storytelling tonight, let's focus our attention on the fruit rather than the crusts of bread, on the beauty of freedom rather than the tethers of slavery, and on the miles of holy work left in front of us as we offer our first fruits with the blessings of many more fruits still to come. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.